inside Kansas City, Missouri, stands a historic hotel. One that at first glance may not seem like much. However, within its walls lies one of America's most haunting unsolved mysteries. The Hotel President, also known as the President's Hotel, depending on who you ask, was built in 1925 as part of a series of successful hotels developed by Niagara Falls businessman Frank A. Dudley. When the hotel officially opened in 1926, it was widely considered quite a premier destination. It even gained national recognition in 1928 when the Republican Party selected it as their headquarters during the Republican National Convention. By 1935, the Hotel President still retained much of its prestige. While it was the only hotel within the Power and Light District at that time, it remained very well regarded and came at quite an affordable price for any travelers in the area. It was this affordability that attracted a mysterious guest in early 1935, one whose stay would spark a chilling mystery that has remained unsolved for nearly a century. This is the story of room 1046. And if you're new here, welcome to my channel. If you're a fan of the creepy, morbid, or disturbing, then you're definitely in the right place. This case is very perplexing. It's definitely one of the weirder unsolved mysteries I've come across. It's very creepy and very strange to me that they haven't actually solved this case yet, so let's dive right in. On the afternoon of Wednesday, the 2nd of January in 1935, at approximately 20 past 1, a young man arrived at the Hotel President in Kansas City, Missouri. He had absolutely no luggage with him, and he specifically requested an interior room on one of the upper floors. So if you don't know, an interior room is a room that doesn't really have a view. It sometimes doesn't even have windows, so it's a bit strange for someone to request an interior room. Usually they're rooms that are given out to people once the hotel is full and they don't have any rooms with views left. But no, this guy specifically wanted an interior room, paying for his stay in advance, which is something he would continue to do. While he was there, he introduced himself as Roland T. Owen and claimed to be from Los Angeles, and the hotel assigned him room 1046. Physically, Owen didn't really stand out. He was just your typical white male with dark hair, although opinions on his age did vary depending on who you asked. Some estimated that he was in his mid-30s, while others believed that he could be in his early 20s. We don't know. Despite his otherwise unremarkable appearance, he did have two notable features. One of them was a scar on his temple, which he concealed with styling his hair over it, and another was a cauliflowered left ear, suggesting a background in maybe wrestling or boxing. Dressed in a dark overcoat and suit, he appeared pretty well groomed and pretty put together, but he didn't carry any bags or luggage with him. A bellhop named Randolph Probst escorted Owen to his room on the 10th floor, and during their brief conversation, Owen mentioned that he had stayed at the nearby, I have no idea how to say this, Muhlebach Hotel the previous night, but he had decided to leave because it was just too expensive for him. Upon reaching room 1046, which was an interior room overlooking the hotel's courtyard, so no outside view of the hotel, Owen entered and emptied all of his pockets. The only items that he revealed were a hairbrush, a comb, and a toothbrush. Don't know why a hairbrush and a comb, but anyways, surely you only need one if you're a male with short hair, but... Once Owen was finished unpacking, he and Probst exited the room. The bellhop locked the door behind them and handed over the key to Owen, and notably, the room's lock functioned from both the inside and the outside of the door, so it required a key to secure it externally. Throughout his whole stay, Owen kept the key with him and never turned it over to the hotel staff. After reaching the lobby, Owen stepped outside and disappeared into the city. No one saw him return, yet at some point he did make his way back to his room. Later that afternoon, housekeeper Mary Stoptic entered room 1046 to clean. Since she had been off work the day before, she was expecting to find the previous guest who was in that room, a woman, and instead when she walked in, she was obviously met with an unfamiliar sight. Owen was sitting inside the room, but he was actually sitting in near total darkness, which is something that a lot of people pointed out about him. The curtains were drawn and the only illumination came from a single dim desk lamp. So yeah, I don't know, if you ask me, this guy could be a vampire. But despite the eerie setting, Owen appeared unconcerned by Mary's presence. In a statement that she later gave to the police, she described the whole encounter with Owen, and she said that he just told her to come in and continue with her work, very unfazed with her being there. The shades were drawn, and she said that from his expression and demeanor, she got the impression that he was either deeply worried or afraid. He looked quite stressed out by something or someone, and he seemed very determined to stay in the dark. Before Mary left the room, he put on his overcoat, he combed his hair, and he told her not to lock the door behind because he was expecting a visitor. And while tidying up, Mary actually spotted a handwritten note on the desk, and it read Don, with those 2 dots, I don't know what they're called, parentheses? I don't know, I'll put it on the screen. She found the note and it said, Don, I will be back in 15 minutes, full stop, wait. So yeah, we don't know who Don is. Anyway, so Owen left the hotel once again, and as instructed, Mary finished her work and left the door unlocked. Mary then returned to the room at 4 p.m. just to bring some fresh towels, and she was again surprised to find Owen in the room in complete darkness again, but this time he was lying across the bed in total darkness. The lights were completely off this time. There was no lamp in the room, like a dim lamp, none of that. There was no light at all. And at this point, Mary and other staff had begun exchanging whispers about this very peculiar man who liked to sit in the dark in his room. His very strange behavior led to many people assuming that he was an alcoholic or just intoxicated in general, as heavy drinking seemed like the most logical explanation as to why someone would want to sit in the dark. Then at 7 a.m. on Friday, the 4th of January, 1935, hotel president switchboard operator Della Ferguson attempted to place a wake-up call to room 1046. When attempting it, she realized that the phone was off the hook, making it impossible to ring. That obviously just means the telephone, the thing that you pick up and put against your ear, wasn't on the I want to say switchboard, it's not a switchboard, wasn't on the keypad, if you know what I'm talking about. You know, old telephones, yep. You can't phone someone if the telephone's off of the keypad device. Then Della just tried speaking into the line, but there was no response, just silence. So then bellhop Randolph Probst was sent to check on the room. Upon coming to the door, a do not disturb sign was placed outside, but he just knocked anyway to see maybe if something was wrong. A deep voice from inside the room actually said come in, but the door was locked. Probst was obviously a bit confused, so he ended up knocking again, and the voice instructed to turn on the lights. And again, Probst was unable to enter because the door was locked, and he told the operator the man inside was likely drunk and just suggested that they try again later. By 8:30 a.m., the phone was still off the hook, and this time another bellhop, Harold Pike, went to investigate. He unlocked the door with a passkey and found the room completely dark yet again. The shades were drawn, and Roland T. Owen, the man registered to the room, was actually lying naked on the bed facing the wall away from Harold. Dark spots were visible on the bedding, but Pike assumed that Owen was asleep or again intoxicated, so he just placed the phone back on the receiver, that's what it's called, a receiver, and left the room. But 2 hours later, people saw on the switchboard again, the phone was off the hook. Randolph Probst was again sent back up. This time he used a passkey to enter the room and found a gruesome scene. Owen was actually kneeling near the door, his head was cradled in his hands, he had blood running down his face, and the walls, bed and bathroom were all completely stained with blood. A chair was even overturned and the room was just in complete disarray. Obviously, Probst got shocked and he quickly left and alerted the hotel manager of what was going on in the room. When they returned, Owen had collapsed against the door and he was barely conscious, and they actually had to push him aside to get into the room. Police arrived with a doctor. The doctor's name was Harold Flanders from Kansas City Hospital. Owen, who was still nude and covered in blood, managed to actually stand up and walk to the bathroom, where he just attempted to take a sip of water from the sink. That's when authorities noticed something very chilling. His wrists, ankles, and neck had actually been bound by white cotton cords. So Dr. Flanders cut them loose, revealing deep bruising on his neck, indicating that somebody had tried to strangle him. Owen suffered very severe injuries. He had stab wounds to the chest, including one that actually punctured his lung. He had a skull fracture, likely from blunt force trauma. He had a very deep gash on his right ear, and he just had defensive wounds on his hands. Despite his injuries, he remained conscious, and he was actually able to answer a few questions from Detective Ira Johnson. Johnson kept questioning him, asking him, who was in the room with you? Roland kept answering that no one was with him, and he said that the way that he got injured was that he fell against the bathtub. Johnson also questioned him on whether he was trying to, off himself, and he answered with no. Shortly after this, Roland lost consciousness due to just all of the injuries that he had. He was rushed to the hospital, but unfortunately by midnight he succumbed to his injuries, and the coroner ruled it a homicide. But that is just the beginning of the mystery that is Roland. So after this, once all of the investigation started, authorities discovered that all of Owen's belongings were missing. His clothes, toiletries, and even hotel amenities like soap and towels were all gone from the room. The murder weapon was also nowhere to be found, although it could have been more than one, but some of the items remained. The items that remained were a woman's hairpin, a necktie label from a New Jersey clothing manufacturer, a safety pin, and an unopened cigarette, as well as a bottle of sulfuric acid. There were also female fingerprints found on a phone stand and on a glass in the bathroom. Witnesses actually reported hearing quite a loud argument in room 1046 between the hours of 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. A neighboring guest recalled hearing very abusive language followed by a very loud noise at 4 a.m., possibly Owen struggling to breathe after being stabbed in the lung. And then came the biggest revelation that Roland T. Owen wasn't actually the man's real name. Authorities scoured records but found no one by that name. They broadcasted his description: a young white man about 5'10", 200 pounds with brown hair and a distinctive scar on his scalp. His very muscular build suggested that he may have been a boxer or a wrestler, but despite weeks of searching and weeks of investigation, no family, no friends, and no real identity of this man could be confirmed. An anonymous woman later called the hotel, simply saying that's the man, he used to live in Clinton, Missouri, but she hung up before people could ask for any more details. And police searched Clinton, and no one matching Owen's description was missing. Investigators pieced together details of the unidentified young man by speaking with staff at the hotel president. They learned that he had previously slept at that other hotel with the weird name Müller-Bach Hotel, and he had complained about his experience there. However, when police followed up, they discovered that he had actually checked into that other hotel between December 31st of 1934 and the 1st of January of 1935, but he had checked in under a completely different name. It wasn't Roland T. Owen, it was Eugene K. Scott. They could prove this because the hotel registration records showed that the handwriting on both of the check-in cards for both hotels were pretty much identical. However, when Eugene K. Scott registered at the Mühlerbach, he claimed to be from Los Angeles. So therefore, authorities searched for any Eugene K. Scott in the LA area, but obviously found nothing. This obviously led them to believe that most of the identities that Roland was using were all fake. Another detail that stood out was that the employees at the other hotel with the letter M recalled that when he arrived at that hotel, he actually had a small bag with him. However, by the time that he checked into the hotel president, he didn't have a bag at all. That bag was gone. After his death, police conducted an extensive search for the missing bag throughout both hotels, but they never ended up finding it. As the investigation continued, that felt like a failure at this point. Officers canvassed the area near the hotel and discovered that lots of people had actually interacted with Roland in the days leading up to his murder. Some of these accounts were just with hotel president staff who had described his very unusual behavior after the 2nd of January, but another key sighting actually came from a city worker named Robert Lane. Lane had an encounter with a man resembling Roland T. Owen on the night before his death. He recalled seeing the young man walking along the road wearing only a very thin undershirt, despite the very cold weather they were having at the time. He also appeared injured with a visible scratch on his arm, so Lane very kindly offered him a ride, And during their very brief conversation, the young man made quite an ominous remark. Roland said, "I'll kill that something name tomorrow." Lane obviously thought little of it at the time, thinking, oh, whatever, this man's either drunk or on drugs, something's wrong with him. But when he later saw Owen's body at the morgue, he immediately recognized him as the man that he had picked up that night. Other witnesses placed Owen in different parts of Kansas City in the days before his death. Several bartenders along 12th Street reported seeing a man matching his description, particularly noting his cauliflowered left ear that lots of people recognized. Interestingly, these witnesses actually often saw him accompanied by two women. Maybe one of these women is who the fingerprints are in the bathroom. A woman left fingerprints in the bathroom. Could be one of them. I don't know. But this raised a lot of further questions. Was he just a stranger passing through Kansas City? Or did this man have deeper ties to the area? And who were these women? Their identities, along with the mysterious person named Don that Owen had also spoken to, remained unknown. While the authorities worked to uncover the identities of the victim and his possible associates, they also struggled to determine a motive for the crime that happened. The brutality of the attack obviously suggested that Owen had been restrained and tortured, possibly as part of an interrogation, but what information his attacker may have been seeking was a complete mystery. Despite very extensive investigation, no evidence linked Owen to any criminal activity. Some speculated that he had been targeted as retribution for something that he had done in the past, but with so little known about his true identity, police could do little more than guess. At one point, there was speculation that he may have been involved in organized crime. The name Don led some to believe that he had crossed paths with maybe a high-ranking figure in the underworld, like in the mafia or in some dodgy gang-related things. However, after nearly 90 years, no concrete evidence has surfaced to support this theory. So weeks and weeks had passed since the murder of this young man in Hotel President, and numerous people kept coming forward saying that they knew who this man was. Among them was a man from Shelby, North Carolina, whose brother had actually gone missing, and a woman from Des Moines, Iowa, who believed the victim was her deceased husband. A Kansas City wrestling manager also thought that the man was an aspiring wrestler from Omaha. A Los Angeles police officer suggested that the man could be a delinquent named Gene Scott, while a man from Texas initially identified the victim as his nephew, only to later retract the claim after confirming his nephew had died years earlier. So lots of people were coming forward claiming to know this man. Obviously, this was a pretty big mystery, and I'm guessing that it was all over the news. So you never really know if people are being truthful with what they say. This might have just been a few people's, claim to fame, their chance to get onto the news. But lots of people came forward saying they knew him when I don't think any of them did. For nearly 3 months, the victim's identity remained a mystery as authorities struggled to locate his next of kin. With no family coming forward, arrangements were made for a funeral for Owen. In March of 1935, it was announced that the victim, known as Roland T. Owen, would be buried in a pauper's grave. However, after the announcement, the local newspaper actually received an anonymous call from a woman who insisted Owen would not be buried in a pauper's grave and that funeral arrangements had already been made for him. Around the same time, a man actually called a different funeral home offering to pay for the entire funeral, though he refused to reveal his identity. The man did provide some strange details about Owen, claiming that Owen had been engaged to his sister, but had actually cheated on her during his travels. The man hinted that he was actually seeking revenge for his sister's heartbreak, and he also requested that Owen be buried in Memorial Park Cemetery near his sister and insisted that information not be shared with the police. But that's a crime, so obviously they had to share it with the police. But anyways, the funeral home staff discovered that the man had also paid for floral arrangements, including a wreath inscribed with "Love Forever, Louise." So everyone felt that the theory that Owen was killed by a jilted lover was pretty strong, as the anonymous callers seemed to have quite an emotional investment in the case, providing money for his funeral and leaving very cryptic messages. However, the investigation into this again led nowhere, as all phone calls were made from payphones and the money was sent anonymously. Police also kept a very close watch over Owen's grave, but no one came to visit him. The case that was now known as the Love Forever murder remained unsolved and no new leads were coming in. It wasn't until late 1936 that finally a breakthrough came. The family of someone known as Artemis Ogletree, a young man who had gone missing in 1934, identified Roland T. Owen as their son. So finally, it's revealed Roland T. Owen is actually Artemis Ogletree. The Ogletree family had received very strange typed letters from Artemis since the beginning of 1935, which they later discovered were actually sent by someone else. The letters became increasingly bizarre, with claims of Artemis traveling to Europe and Egypt, though no official records of his travels existed. In late 1936, the Ogletree family actually saw the newspaper article about the unsolved murder in Kansas City, and unfortunately, they recognized the sketch of the deceased man. Fearing the worst, they immediately contacted Kansas City police, who confirmed the identity of Roland T. Owen as Artemis Ogletree. Despite the family's relief in finally reclaiming Artemis's remains, they continued to actually receive more typed letters even after his burial with increasingly false information. So even though they found the correct identity of the deceased, the murder still remained unsolved. Police still continued investigations, and the police actually traced his movements and identified a companion who was traveling with Ogletree. Police Chief Thomas J. Higgins reported that Ogletree had been accompanied by a man through at least 3 Kansas City hotels before his death. This companion disappeared shortly after the murder, and no female involvement was suspected at that time. Despite tracking Ogletree and his companion across all 3 states, significant gaps in their timeline still remained. Ogletree had actually been traveling with a group up until 1934, eventually reaching Los Angeles before he was murdered in Kansas City in January of 1935. Police had difficulty locating his companion, who they believed had used many different aliases. Same as Ogletree, he had also used many different names across all of the hotels that they traveled to. However, in 1937, the police made another breakthrough. Joseph Ogden, a 36-year-old cook, emerged as the primary suspect. Authorities had been pretty aware of him for some time, but didn't really publicly name him until after his arrest for an unrelated crime. It was actually believed that Ogden was Ogletree's companion through his travels, possibly even the mysterious Don that Ogletree was writing letters to. And he was obviously writing these letters just before his death, so that just ramped up the suspicion. Ogden's true identity was uncovered after a grisly discovery in New York. A trunk containing the body of Oliver Cynical, a petty criminal, was found at a shipping agency, and the man who shipped this body was identified as Joseph Marshall. And Joseph Marshall is one of the aliases that Ogden had used. Investigators obviously soon linked Ogden to the murder, and he confessed to killing Oliver Cynical after being confronted with the evidence. Ogden was obviously also linked to Ogletree's death, as he had traveled with him in Kansas City and was described by hotel staff as Ogletree's companion. One of Ogden's aliases, named Donald Kelso, was used when he checked into a hotel with Ogletree shortly before Ogletree was murdered. Kansas City authorities still believed that Ogden was the prime suspect, but they could find no physical evidence tying him to the murder. There was also another potential suspect who came up in and amongst all of the investigations. His name was Joseph Simpson, and he had also actually been a travel companion of Ogletree in 1934. He didn't have any criminal history or anything incriminating him at all, so he was never charged and he was never really seen as a suspect. However, Ogletree's mother actually suspected that Simpson might have known more about her son's death, but again, there was nothing tying him to the murder, so the police couldn't investigate into him further. Simpson actually avoided lots of attempts from Ogletree's mother to meet with him and just have a discussion, so that obviously again ramped up the suspicion, and Ogletree's mother definitely believes that he was involved. So decades later, a researcher named John Horner actually uncovered new details about the case after being contacted by someone who had discovered newspaper clippings and other items related to the case in an elderly person's belongings. This person hinted at more significant evidence, which remains disclosed, which means it probably didn't go anywhere. So the identity of Artemis Ogletree's killer and the motive behind the crime still remains a complete mystery. Could he have just been the target of a wandering killer like Joseph Ogden, or was he killed by someone closer to him, such as Joseph Simpson? Another theory suggests that he may have fallen victim to a revenge plot, the one that I mentioned earlier, that involved his fiance's brother. It's said that the brother may have discovered that Artemis was being unfaithful, and this could have been the cause of his death. Some also believe that Artemis had become entangled in organized crime, perhaps involving himself with some really dodgy people in the drug industry or just gang trafficking narcotics. Could this explain his murder? Another more unlikely theory suggests that he may have actually been involved in espionage, possibly tied to German activities before World War II, but again, nothing proves this. Ultimately, the most plausible explanation may be that Artemis was caught in a very sinister scheme, the full details of which have been just lost to time, carried out by those who carefully distanced themselves from the crime once it had occurred. And there you have it. That is the full story of Room 1046 and the story of Roland T. Owen, who is now known as Artemis Ogletree. It is quite a whirlwind of information, lots of theories, lots of leads that led to complete dead ends, lots of people claiming they know what happened and who killed him, but ultimately no one besides Artemis knows what happened to him. I mean, the fact that they couldn't find this person's real name for so long completely baffles me, and I feel like if they had maybe uncovered that he was Artemis a little bit earlier in the investigation, it might have helped a bit. Just because his family had pretty important information about the notes, I feel like they probably could have investigated a little bit deeper into the notes that the family got. But in the end, again, no physical evidence tying the murder of Artemis to anyone, so this case still remains unsolved. Let me know in the comments down below what you thought of this case and what your theory is. Which theory do you believe? Do you have your own theory on this? And I will see you next week for another video.